Okay, so now that we've identified these fields, we need to architect and build the model for this. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to now design the ETL process logically. Okay, we're going to logically design it. Once we perform the logical design, we're then moved to the physical design, which we do next week. We're not going to do that tonight. But I'm going to describe the logical process that you're going to do. Okay? Here we go. All right, the very first thing that we need to do is we need to build, so we've got the source data here. The source data is going to be extracted into a staging table within a database. So we've got a database here. This will be the data Mart database. Okay? And we have a staging table, tables, multiple tables. So we have the source data. We're going to extract it from there. Now, during this process, we could do transformations here. Or we could do, this is optional, we could do transformations here if we wanted to. Okay? And then we're going to, no matter what, we're going to extract. We could transform here, or we could transform later, and then we're going to load that into here. From this, we're going to go to our data Mart tables. Okay? So the idea is that we have this CSV here. We're going to extract that data from the source CSV file. In this case, it's a .csv file. We're going to do transformations in the process if we want. If we struggle with this process and we're better at SQL, we can put the data in SQL Server tables here. Once they're in the SQL Server tables, we can then perform some transformations in there, and then we're going to extract that and load it to the permanent. So we would perform another ETL process from here. So this is staging, broken up into three basic stages. Okay? This is just the bare bones. All right? It's just the bare bones. We're trying to accomplish the bare bones process. All right, so let's assume, okay, we're going to use the tools, which we'll learn next week, to perform the extraction process. Now, to extract this data, all right, using SQL Server, we're going to make a connection using a tool. We're going to connect to this data here. All right, once we make that connection, we're going to tell it, all right, now what we said was that all of the data inside of a CSV is what type of data, we said? They're all strings, right? Okay? So knowing that all of these are strings, let's look at our data types here that we could identify. What should population be? What data type? An int. What should violent crime be? All of these are int, right? Int. Int, theft, int, arson, int, row ID, int. In our dimensions, what should city be? In SQL Server, it would be varchar. Now, what size should we pick? How would we determine the size of the city? What might you want to do? The amount of characters in the largest city. Now, if we're unsure, if we're getting the data from a CSV, we might, in our staging, we might have to bump this up to really high number. So it's crazy, but we might have to bump it up like 8,000. All right, we might have to say it's a varchar 8,000. Why? If we put it too low and we put it down to like, let's just say, oh no, there's no way. The biggest city in the U.S. Can't be any more than like 200 characters. You know, that sounds like a lot, right? You never know. You never know. You never know if you're unsure. If it is set to 200 characters and there is one city that's 201, what will happen to the ETL process? It's going to fail, right? It's going to choke on the city name, and it's going to truncate the city's name, perhaps, depending on how you set up the package. So, for instance, if it did load, it might, a letter at the end of the name of the city would be missing. What about the state? What kind of data type is it going to be? Same thing, right? Varchar. And let's say we put that one at, I don't know, I know that's too much, but 1,000 characters. I'm simply trying to prove a point. Now, we'll talk about year in a minute. Now, when we bring this data into staging, the size is big, but then, okay, we might get the max size of the biggest city. That would help us determine the data type and size in the permanent table. So this would be a varchar 8,000 in staging, and in here, it might only be a varchar, I don't know, 300. You see? So once it's in staging, what we have to do once we get the data out of the CSV into staging, we have to examine the data. We have to determine its appropriate size, okay, and its appropriate data type. Now, since these guys are integers, okay, now those will be pretty easy. In the transformation process, we could cast these guys to ints using a transformation tool in SSIS. Okay? If for some reason we had problems here, bringing the data from here to here, many of you are going to struggle in that process. Okay? You're going to make bad decisions on your staging tables. It's a learning process. Okay? What you might have to do is you may have to, in your staging table, these guys might have to be varchars if you have trouble with them. If you have trouble with any data, in most cases it will come across as a string because it came from a string if it wasn't a CSV. You could drop it in the staging table, and then from here to here, you could run a cast command, right? A cast SQL command, and bring it into this as an int. Okay? So that's what I mean. You can perform the transformation in to the process of staging. If you have trouble, load it in as a variable character, bump it up to a high level of bits, okay, of bytes, and then here you would move it into the final, and you would run the transformation here and cast it. Okay, you could cast it there.